Okay, we're ready? Okay. What we're going to be doing today, Meretz Hashem, we are going to finish chapter 246, Rishon Vav, which we started last week. And we're going to do one chapter in this book. Probably not going to finish the whole thing, but at least we'll do some parts of it. Regarding Hishtadchus, which is, in simple terms, visiting the gravesite of a tzaddik or visiting gravesites in general. This city of Tzfas has the merit of having one of the oldest cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries in the world. And one of the most illustrious named individuals are buried here, as we all know. And of course, this week is the Yom HaYilula of the Rabbi on Shabbos, Gimel Tammuz, and many Chassidim throughout the world travel to New York, to Crown Heights, to Queens, and therefore that's why this is a fine opportunity to learn these halachos, which are not very well learned or known. So let's first begin with Reish Mem Vav. Reish Mem Vav again discusses the halachos involved in renting or lending an object or an animal to a Gentile, and it will remain with him over Shabbos. And we began last week the introduction by stating that there is although there is no prohibition against having your object do malacha over Shabbos, that is the only Bais Shammai and the Rekeach and the Yerabba and the Bach and the Yerabba hold the opinion that your items aren't even allowed to do malacha over Shabbos, but we don't hold that way, and the minhag is not that way. Remember last week we brought a proof from the fact that we all use Shabbos clocks, hence proving that we don't even we're not even stringent. We don't even take into account the stringent approach to prohibit one's items from doing malacha. Nonetheless, we stated that there are certain restrictions with regards to lending or renting the objects to a guy on Erev Shabbos, and we said that this is because of it looks like one is telling the guy to do work on his behalf as one is receiving money. So it's like he's your shliach. This has to do with Gzeir v'Milo Nafis. So let's review that again. Renting objects to a Gentile on Erev Shabbos. So renting objects to a Gentile on Erev Shabbos, it is forbidden to rent to a Gentile any item which a Shabbos prohibition is done with. So while you can rent a hammer, well, maybe not a hammer. No, that's malacha is done with a hammer. Okay, you can rent a bowl that he's not going to be using for food to a Gentile on Erev Shabbos, as no malacha is done with a bowl, but you cannot lend him an item that a malacha is done with, such as a car, such as rent, right? We're talking about rent, such as a car, such as a cell phone. All these things that are used with a forbidden work on Shabbos cannot be rented to a Gentile on Erev Shabbos. Why? Because since he's paying you money, since there's an exchange here of money, it appears that he is the shliach of. It appears that he is the shliach of this Jew to do the malacha. So even though in truth he's not the shliach, I mean, it's rented to him, it's his object over Shabbos, and there's no prohibition of my item doing work over Shabbos. Nonetheless, because of Maris Ayin, it is forbidden to be done, and that's the halacha. So I said before, because of this, a rental company for cars or cell phones or anything that does malacha would have a problem in renting on Fridays to Gentiles. And they would have, what we discussed last week, that they would most likely, the best way to arrange it would be just to be closed on Friday. And that's what I have seen done by some rental car companies. They don't do rentals on Friday. The rentals on Friday. An example of a case that would be permitted, because it's not malacha related, is if you rent out tuxedos, right? There's no isser involved in wearing a tuxedo. So if a guy says he has a wedding on Saturday and he wants to rent a tuxedo and it's Friday, not a problem. There's no malacha done with tuxedos. All this is regarding renting. Regarding lending, we said there is no gzeira at all. Since there is no money being exchanged, it doesn't appear that he's your shliach, and therefore the sages did not make a decree against doing so. So you can lend a car to a Gentile, you can lend a cell phone to a Gentile, that is not a problem. The issue is just with renting. Regarding an apartment, so an apartment is not an item of malacha, you simply live in it. Although there are malachas that are done in the apartment, we questioned this last week, but the lenient approach would be is that this is not included in the gzeira, because an apartment is not an item of malacha. It's an item that you sleep in, you live in. That's not considered a prohibited act. So how is he my shliach? If I had a guy going to my apartment on Shabbos, what's the Mara sign that he looks like he's my shliach to do what? What malacha is he doing? If he happens to turn on the light, that's already a cause action. It's not the direct action of me allowing him into my apartment. So Svara would say that there is no problem for you to rent out your apartment or your zimmer to an Erev Shabbos to a guy. Although, of course, we already discussed these other issues involved, such as you can't take Schar Shabbos, so it has to be one lump sum. So you can't say, check-in is 8 o'clock at night, check-out is 7 o'clock. No, you can't do that. I'm just saying. You can't make in a way that the payment, or you can't do hourly payment. If you decide it's more worth for you to do an hourly simmer, you tell them, well, I charge 100 shekel an hour, then it's a problem because you're making money with Shabbos. It has to be a lump sum that includes the 24 hours of Shabbos in order for it to be mutter. And of course, as we discussed other times, the kalim would all be treif unless you lock them up. Remember that. So these are all things you have to pay attention to whenever you're renting a home or an apartment to a Gentile.
Renting to an Erev Shabbos to a religious Jew is no problem.
Erev Shabbos to a frum Jew, what's the problem? You can rent a car to a religious Jew on Erev Shabbos. There's no chashash.
And non-religious
Even a non-religious Jew, there's as far to say it's mutter, because what's the Chacham never decreed Maras Ayin that people would say that I made a non-religious Jew my shliach to do malach for me on Shabbos. Nobody would do such a thing. So that's why the story is that for a non-religious Jew it wouldn't be possible. The problem is just with a guy.
It's not a problem.
Okay, the next discussion that we had was giving a Gentile an item on Shabbos or Erev Shabbos close to dark and having him take it from your home. So we discussed last week, the main issue here is that if there's no Erev in the city, when I give him an item and he leaves my house with this item, it appears that I am asking him to carry it. And therefore it's forbidden, because again, it looks like he's your shliach to do this malacha. And from this, by the way, we can understand if the Chacham forbade giving an item to a guy, even though I'm not telling him to leave my house, even though I'm not asking him to carry it somewhere for me, it's for his own benefit. He wants to borrow, as we said before, a bowl. He's doing it for his own benefit. It has nothing to do with me. Nonetheless, the Chachamim answered it because that it looks like he's your shliach. Certainly, it's forbidden to ask a guy to carry something for you on Shabbos. Right? It's forbidden to give a Gentile on Shabbos or even Erev Shabbos directly prior to sunset any object, whether in a form of rental, collateral, acquisition, fixing, lending for 30 days, which means like this. Whether I'm renting him this item, which you already said is prohibited anyways if it's a malacha item, or I'm lending it to him, nonetheless, it is usher to give it to him on Shabbos or Erev Shabbos close to dark without enough time for him to move it into the non-Erev area. This applies even when I agree with the Gentile on all the terms before Shabbos. The reason for this is due to Maras. The only time that we're lenient is in the case that you're lending it to him, not renting it, and there's an Erev in the city. Remember we said the Alter Rebbe holds that even if there's no Erev, we make a decree. It's machlekes, and the Alter Rebbe is of the opinion that even when there's no Erev, there's still Marasayim. We still make a decree of Marasayim. The Chachamim weren't lenient in an Erev area. So therefore, even in Tzfas, according to the Alter Rebbe, you can't even lend, or give in any form an object to a guy and have him take it out of your home on Shabbos, unless it's a time of need and you're lending it to him for less than 30 days. Those are the conditions. That even the Alter Rebbe would agree, it's on a time of need and for less than 30 days.
What does the less than 30 days do for the situation?
Because 30 days is considered as if you're giving it to him. It's like considered it's his.
After 30 days.
Correct. Yeah. We see like with the talis, the halacha is that if you lend someone a talis for a 30-day period, then he's chayiv to put tzitzis on, as it's considered as if it's his. But until 30 days, it's not chayiv tzitzis. That's why if you borrow someone's talis, let's say for chaskayanim, then you're not obligated to say a bracha.
So you want it to, for this situation to be permissible, you want it to be like he's owning it himself.
No, I don't want it.
You don't want it to
No.
go then. Is that
No,
why?
Because then it looks like looks like shlichus of business. It looks like the Marasayan aspect applies.
If you're lending somebody a talus and it's only a loan, he still makes a brach on it? What
He's allowed to. It's reshus. It's a voluntary blessing, unless you give it to him for 30 days. Say, listen, give it back to me next month. You can keep it. I'm leaving town. You can keep it from now until a month from now. Shabbos Mevarchim. And then he has to say, bro.
After 30 days, he has to say brach.
No, if he's giving it for a period of 30 days,
Yeah.
then I believe even within the 30 days he has to say bracha. I'll look it up again. Okay, at that point I have to clarify. Certainly after 30 days, I'll say bracha. But on a shul's talus, that's a different story. Shul's talus is considered to belong to him, belong to everyone in the town. So then we don't say bracha regardless. It's not considered borrowed; it's considered his. Okay, the next discussion that we had was regarding animals. We're going to read it again inside, finish the siman, and then summarize it outside and complete this chapter. So in Sif Gimel, we said the following. It is forbidden to rent or even lend. So this is the additional prohibition that we find by animals versus items, for the simple reason that items are not instructed to rest on Shabbos. Animals of a Jew are instructed to rest on Shabbos. Therefore, it makes no difference if it's rented to him, if it's lent to him, etc. So that is forbidden to do malach. As a person is commanded to make his animals rest. However, he's allowed to rent it and lend it, says the Ramah, and to stipulate that it be returned to him before Shabbos. But it doesn't help for him to say, well, we put in the stipulation of the contract that he's not going to do work with my cow over Shabbos, with my donkey over Shabbos. That guy is not believed to uphold the stipulation. So it has to be in a way that he will return it before Shabbos. Now, if he went in and did so and lent it or rented it to him, on condition that be returned before Shabbos, and it didn't happen, the ikra, the Gentile held it back, the Shabbos on Shabbos. So what should he do? Remember what we said? We gave two eitzes. First eitzah was yafkirenu beinu levein atzmei, peidim Shabbos. He should make it hefker. He should make it hefker, and the Alter Rebbe explains that it's a very interesting type of hefker. You could say he makes it hefker. He's going to lose his cow. He's going to come back after Shabbos, ask the guy back. He's stealing technically because now it's the guy's. He made it hefker, right? The answer is he's only making it hefker while the animal is working. So when the guy decides to use it for plowing, it's only hefker at that moment, and while it's plowing, the guy can't be claiming it. So it's a tricky, it's a little trick in Choshen Mishpat of where you avoid the isser of your animal doing work on Shabbos because it's not mine while it's doing work. At the same time, it's only hefker during the time it does work, and the guy can't be claiming it at the time. Or you should say that, this is in the second case, you should simply say, I want my animal to be acquired to the Gentile in order to be saved from a biblical prohibition. It says the Ramah, if he wants, he can make it hefker in front of three people. That's a general rule. If you want to make something hefker, it has to be done in front of three people. If you did it by yourself, it's not. It could be biblically hefker, but not rabbinically. It's not considered hefker. So if you want to, make something hefker, you need to take three Jews, like a bezdin, and declare this item is hereby hefker. I am. Whoever wants can take it. That's how it is done. The only exception to this is chametz, which we can say even kol chamiyah on our own. We don't need three people. So it's not a din of hefker, but rather it's a din of removing any association with the chametz. It's not a matter of being mafka the chametz. So that's why it works. But in general, you do need three people to make something hefker. And even so, says the Alter Rebbe, says the Ramah, no one is able to merit on this to merit this item, because right, he made it hefker in front of three people. Why? As his entire intent of making it hefker was only to remove from him the prohibition of Shabbos, but not for people to come and take. The dafka of Shabbos, says the Ramah, this isser is only on Shabbos, and a person is not instructed that his animal rests on Yontiv, and therefore, according to the Ramah, that you're allowed to lend or rent your animal to a guy, even if he's going to work it on Yom Tov. Practically, we don't rule this way. The Alter Rebbe is stringent, and we apply Shvisas Behemo even on Yom Tov. So Chachila, we will do one of the above tricks that we said. Halacha Daled, Yisrael Shizke Shvarim La'akum, Lachrish Behem, Mechayish Behem, Yesh Matirim, and Kibol La'akum, Machayis Misuk Zeilu Gneva, Yukro V'Zoyl. A Jew who rented oxen to a Gentile to plow with. So there are some poskim who say that if the Gentile accepted upon himself liability, if anything happens to this ox, he will pay for it, such as if it dies, if it gets stolen, if it goes up in value or down in value. If the guy accepted all this liability, and some poskim say it's as if it's his regarding the halachas of Shabbos, and therefore there's no problem with him using it to plow. Others say the Others argue say no, since still the Gentile is unable to sell it, it is therefore still considered the Jews and has a prohibition of it doing work. Okay, we'll do halacha 5, the last halacha. Sifhei. What happens if a Jew and a Gentile are both have joint ownership of an animal, which is, by the way, a classic case example today. Today, there are hardly any animals that are owned only by Jews. Why? Why not? Why can't we have animals owned by Jews only? The answer: when we have animals that are owned by religious Jews, usually, or not even non-religious Jews, but certain religious Jews, usually it's owned for the purpose of shchita, the purpose of slaughtering and eating its meat. Now, when we slaughter an animal, we have a few halachas that are pertinent to a Jewish animal. Number one, we just learned from last week's parsha in Eretz Yisrael, Parshas Kairach, the matana of the bechayra to the kayanim. A bechar, firstborn animal, has to be of a kosher animal, has to be given to the kayan. So just imagine what a balagana would be if all the firstborns of all the cows and sheep and livestock had to be given to a kayan. First of all, it would be a huge loss of money. But furthermore, a bechar is kachim. It's a karban. It's a karban. And the halacha is that you're not allowed to eat it. It's for even the kain who's allowed to eat the bechar meat, he's not allowed to eat it until he offers it on the temple, meaning Mashiach comes, or it receives a blemish on its own. And that can take years sometimes. You're not allowed to blemish it purposely. It's forbidden. You're not allowed to do anything to purposely blemish it. So what would happen if all the firstborn animals, all the Jewish-owned herds, they had to give the firstborn animal, and let's not forget, tracking it would be also a little bit of a balagan, even though every animal has a number, like a tutat zahut, it has an identification number. So you just see, okay, has this animal ever given birth before? You look up in the computer. So there is a way of telling. It's organized on paper who's what, which animal is what. But nonetheless, this would be something they would have to keep track of. And second of all, and make sure it doesn't get mixed up with the rest of the herd, a bechar animal, but also which kind is going to accept to take your bechar and raise it for 2-3 years until it gets a blemish? The Rav of Petach Tikva in the 1950s, he was a kohen, and one of the members of his kahila, who had a herd of goats, one of his goats gave birth to a firstborn baby goat, and he decided to give it as a present to the Rav. He was very close to the Rav, and he wanted to surprise him. So he bought a silver platter, and in the middle of the night he came and he left the baby goat on the silver platter in front of the door of the Rav. So when he would open up the door, he would see the bechar baby goat on the silver platter. And the Rav opened the door, he looked at it, he brought it in his house, and then, what is this? He called up the member of the community. He says, I gave you a bechar. This is a bechar. And this poor Rav had to raise this goat for 3 years until it got a mum, drove him and his wife Meshuggah, and he had to build an extra part of his house for the goat to be able to live in, this kachim goat, to be able to live in, and that's where he felt it on his own skin, how we got to change the system regarding Jewish-owned animals. So what do? In all the Jewish-owned herds throughout the world, they have a guy join in the ownership. It's partially owned by a guy. Usually it's done with Mechiras Chametz. Whenever we do Mechiras Chametz sale, once a year, the Rabbi also gives out a Mechiras Behema sale. And they also, those who own animals that would have firstborns, we also sell the Behema. Let's say you have to sell a part of it that its life is dependent on. So you can sell its brain or just sell half of it, but usually the guy isn't paying. It's more of a halachic matter than it is an investment of business. So you find a guy, just like the chametz guy that you're selling to buy the hearts or the brains of all the animals. And since he owns a part of the animal that the life is dependent on, it becomes exempt from the chayv. That is how it is done. Yeah. And there's another reason, all over the world. Not just this one. Another reason is because there's a halacha that we have to give of a Jewish-owned animal owned by Yisrael. He has to give the cheek, the stomach, and the leg, the arm to the kayin. This applies even today. So imagine if these parts of every single animal had to be given to the kayanim. So basically, once again, having it sold to a guy helps us circumvent this issue. So the bottom line is that for one reason or another, all the animals pretty much are not Jewish owned, they're owned by a guy. Also, joint ownership. So if we have an animal with joint ownership, the halacha is, what about Shabbos in such a case? If there's not joint ownership, can a guy do malach with it on Shabbos? And the answer is, it is permitted for the guy to do malach with it on Shabbos. If you stipulate with the guy and say that you get to use the animal on Shabbos and I get to use it during the week, just like we discussed in previous chapters regarding the business, and then it ends up that on Shabbos it's his animal, it's not mine. But if you didn't stipulate this to begin with, it's forbidden even though you make a stipulation afterwards, as we learned also there regarding the business. All stipulations of trading days must be done before the business begins. If Okay, I'm not going to explain all that. It's a little bit complex and it's not so common and relevant anyways, right? Nobody here owns an animal.
No.
Okay, so let's just summarize this halacha and we're going to complete the chapter. Renting and lending animals to a Gentile. So it is forbidden to lend or rent one's animals to a guy, even if the guy promises, I give you my word, not to work the animal on Shabbos. However, in the following scenarios, it is permitted. We have four cases of heter. Case number one, on condition that it will be returned before Shabbos. One may rent or lend the animal on condition that the guy will return it before Shabbos, as if he returns it before Shabbos, what's the problem? Now, what if he doesn't return it? In such a case, you are to disown the animal, as we said. Number two, with intent to free before Shabbos. In a time of need, for the sake of the mitzvah, a person is allowed, even the chatchila, to rent or lend an animal to a guy even during Shabbos, if he resolves to free the animal, as we said, in front of the best three people, you make it hefker for Shabbos. In such a case, it is permitted. The third option is to stipulation in a document. If it's written in a document that the Gentile may not work it on Shabbos, this is the last thing I read that didn't explain. And if he does, then he becomes liable for everything that occurs to it. Then when they rent it on Shabbos, even initially, as if the guy does work to it on Shabbos, it's no longer considered Jews. In other words, this heter is saying like this. Let's say the animal is owned completely by a Jew, but the guy wants to rent it. So I tell the guy, you're not allowed to work with it on Shabbos. And if you do, we have here a signed contract by a lawyer that's going to say that the second you do work with it, it's owned by you. You acquire it, and you have to now pay me for everything. You have to pay me for the animal. You bought the animal. So you did it in such a way, you're covering yourself, because if he goes ahead and breaks the commitment, then the animal belongs to him, and he's not doing work with my animal. The fourth option is a Gentile has liability of market price. When rented an animal to a Gentile in condition that the Gentile take liability for any decrease of price of the animal. Or likewise, an increase of price would deem a profit belonging to him, then it's as if the animal belongs to him. If he's accepting liability on the animal, the guy. Whatever happens to it, it goes down in price, goes up in price, he gets the loss or gain, then it's as if it belongs to him and allowed to rent it to him even over Shabbos.
How does that express itself if it goes up or down? Well,
Let's say the market value of a cow. The market value of a cow before Shabbos was, $500 a cow. Now it's $600 a cow. So if I stipulate with him before Shabbos that anything that happens to this cow is on your cheshbon, is on your liability. So if it now went up $100, he just made $100. If it went down $100, he has to pay me $100.
but it still belongs to the original owner.
That's the whole thing. The fact that he has such strong liability over it is as if it now belongs to him.
In the end, if there's money, you have to exchange.
Correct. He'll give it back to him after Shabbos.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So from all this, though, we can learn a practical case. Someone who owns a trained dog or a monkey or a parakeet and would like them to do a malacha for him on Shabbos. Like, is there an issur of a mirul nachri to have my monkey turn on the lights for me? Right? A monkey isn't a guy. Is there shlichus by an animal? The answer is no, there isn't. However, your animal is now to do malacha. It's a much stronger issur than a mirul nachri. If you own an animal, it's now to do malacha on Shabbos. So obviously, in all these cases, even an animal, you're not allowed to have a trained animal that can do malacha for you on Shabbos due to the mitzvah of shvisa. Okay, that's the end of 246. Chapter 247, which will begin next week. Rishon Zayin, it begins discussing the laws of sending mail during the week if there's a possibility that the mail will be sent by the Gentile on Shabbos. Mail services, right? Even today we still use it. FedEx or UPS, whatever it is, or Doar Yisrael, they say it never gets to its destination, but whatever, whatever it is that you're using to send your mail, they're machmir, they don't even send during the week, not just on Shabbos, even during the week they don't send. In any event, so the question is, if it's being sent over Shabbos, what's the deal? How is it mutter to send mail if the guy is going to send it over Shabbos? So that's going to be next week in Rishon Zayin, and then Rishon Ches is the laws of taking a cruise on a ship over Shabbos. That's pertinent to you, right? And you'd be on a boat, on a ship over Shabbos. So that's probably two weeks from now. Or if we have enough time next week, we'll do it. We're now going to move right on to our next material for the day. You got this book, right?
Yeah.
So I have to give you a copy. Your gold membership. Do you remember the name? Yeah.
This is volume 2.
There's 3 volumes. There's 2 volumes and a summary, which is volume 3. This is right now the most detailed and up-to-date Abedus book in English of all on the market. I don't say that just myself, that's the testimonials I received from some of my readers. Okay, so there's a number of chapters in the book that actually have nothing to do with a person who's personally an avo and are relevant to all people. For example, grave visitation, not only Aveilim visit graves. In fact, for some reason, I think one of the highest grossed activities that Jewish people do is visit grave sites of tzaddikim. It's like people do cruises here and there. We do, visit Mezhebush, visit Haditch, visit Queens. We're very into visiting kibbutz tzaddikim. It's Baruch Hashem, that's how we connect with the past. So there's an entire chapter of halachas relevant to visiting a gravesite. And here in Tzfas, as we said, we have one of the oldest cemeteries in the world, and one of the oldest in the world, and one of the oldest Jewish cemeteries in the world.
New section.
So it's important for us to be aware of all the halachas that relate to cemeteries, so we act appropriately there.
Visiting cemeteries, the graves of Tzaddikim, right up your alley. The grave of my father? Right up your alley. No, you love Tzaddikim.
Okay, so I want to first say there's 12. This chapter is split into 12 halachas, basically 12 different topics that deal with grave visiting. And I'll just mention what topics they discuss. Okay, first, a general, the allowance and custom of doing so, right? The background of why do we do it? Is it mutter to do so? Maybe it's considered exhuming the spirits of the dead when you visit a gravesite. We're going to go through all those details. Is there anything I'm not allowed to do when I'm by a gravesite? So it shouldn't be similar to exhuming the soul, which is otherwise known as Derech Shalamesim. So that's first and foremost, is getting through the understanding of the heter or mitzvah of doing so by Gir says Tzaddikim. Second is which graves should one visit and which are the graves that one should not visit. So there are graves that one should not visit. We're going to go through this. We're going to go through, for example, the graves in one city, like Tzfas, versus graves in another city. And one of the things we're going to see throughout this entire chapter is that there's really no such thing as dead people. We got to get that mentality out of our heads. People don't die. People, they go into in concealed mode. I have on my Excel sheet that I use. There's a mode where you can hide the information, so it looks blank. But if you go in the upper corner, you can actually see what information is written there. So that's really what it is. We don't see them. We can't communicate with them, at least not on a conscious level. And those who say they could should be checked out. There's some good places here in Tzfas that take care of them. But nonetheless, they're alive. They're alive. They're there. Their souls are there. Their spirits are there. They hear what we say, and we have to be extremely careful. Throughout this chapter, we see is that they also still have feelings, and sometimes feelings of vengeance or anger, or get insulted by us doing things that are improper to their honor and respect.
It's not just tzaddikim. It's every.
Absolutely, not just tzaddikim. Even goyim.
Really?
So the point is that a gravesite is not an area of dead people, which you can do whatever you want. It's an area of people that are very much alive outside of their bodies, and that's a reason to be even more careful. And that's why, in general, I think throughout the world, there's a certain respect that people, even people that are unaffiliated with religion, that they show to gravesites, as everyone has a certain awe from, spirits of the dead, so to say. Even those who may say, "Well, I'm an atheist, but I don't mess with graves." Why? It's just it's nothing according to your philosophy. No, not cut. Even my atheist faith has limitations. So, in any event, this is one of the things we see throughout this chapter, and we have a lot of halachas created for the sake of the respect of the dead, and not to start up with the dead. And we're also going to go through the custom dates of visiting the grave sites. What are the general times of visiting that a person should visit by a relative, for example, who passed away? The auspicious times throughout the year to visit Kibbutz Tzaddikim or Bechlal Kvarim. Dates that one should not visit. These are date restrictions. Day restrictions. Should one avoid visiting at night? People restrictions. Which type of people should avoid visiting a grave site? The ceremony that's followed when you visit a gravesite. We have a whole bunch of details here. Number 9 is the restrictions applicable while we visit a gravesite or a cemetery. That's a whole bunch of different things we're going to learn, different restrictions that apply by a graveyard. 10, the minhagim applicable when you leave a gravesite. 11 is the halachos of benefiting from a cemetery. And 12, how do you create a new cemetery? So these are all the halachos in the chapter.
20 minutes. 20 minutes you have for this to begin this time.
Yeah, I understand. We're going to continue probably Tuesday as well. Okay. So the allowance, custom, purpose, and reason for visiting graves. So practically, the vast majority of the Jewish people are accustomed to visit graves. You have a slight few who are part of the anti-grave visitation group. And they hold that it's of a desire. They say all these strange things like, it's idolatry, or it's Derech Shalamesim. It's forbidden to visit graves. One of them is the Dardurim. The Dardurim are very anti-graves.
Mm-hmm.
Dardurim.
Dardurim?
Yeah.
What's that?
Okay, so Dardurim basically is a group of Yemenite Jews that the started by the father of Yosef Kapach in Teiman in the early 1900s that do not believe in Torah's Kabbalah or in the Kedusha of the Zohar. And they were put in Chayrim by the David Harabanim of Teiman and Eretz Yisrael and Europe. And but nonetheless, this is one of the things they believe. The Rav Ratzon Arusi, you may have heard of him. He's a very big figure here in Eretz Yisrael. He's the chief rabbi of Kiryat Ata and a member of the Rabbanut Harishit Yisrael. I may be mistaken, and he should forgive me if I am, but I do believe I read a letter of his conveying his distance from visiting graves. He believes it's forbidden, you're not allowed to visit graves. I do believe I did read such a letter. He is a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef Kapach, who is again the head of the Dardu movement. But you have the Dardu movement is those specific Teimanim, but you also have other people who. So does this have any say? Does this have any discussion in halacha? And the answer is it does. Okay, on the one hand, the custom of the Jewish people starting in biblical times is to visit Kvarim. We just learned it in Parsha Shlach. What did Kalev do when he came to Eretz Yisrael? He visited the Avis. He visited Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So we see that there is scriptural source for grave visiting, and so on and so forth. We have a lot of examples of the visiting graves. We have recorded in the Mechaber in the Shulchan chapter 344 in Yerodea, in the name of the Goldstein, that it's proper to visit a grave of a tzaddik on the day of the end of Avelos of the first year. So here, he writes in Shulchan Aruch to visit the grave at that time. The Ramah writes that's customary to visit Kivrei Tzaddikim and Erev Rosh Hashanah. And we have a lot of other sources in the Poskim about visiting graves, so therefore clearly there is no issue involved. We find that the Medrash writes that one of the whole reasons of why Rachel was buried on the road to Hebron was so the Jewish people can daven by her grave. So they can stop there and daven. Now you may want to argue, well, that's only Kivrei Tzaddikim. Only Kivrei Tzaddikim. Other Kvarim, who says there's a precedent to visit their graves? Maybe by other Kvarim is Asr when they're dead, so it's not really considered exhuming the dead. But people who are really dead when they're dead, maybe should be forbidden. So the answer is that here too we find precedent and rulings in the Achreinim and in the Poskim that it's mutter to visit graves of its relatives, even if they're not considered tzaddikim. But this wasn't so simple. While we do agree visiting tzaddikim has a very strong scriptural source, visiting other graves, non-tzaddikim, was actually under debate. And I'll read to you what Rav Chaim Paltiel in Shuvas Maram Baruch wrote. He was an early Achron. Could be even he was a late Rishon. He is recorded in the Shach and the Bach, so he's an opinion in Halach. And he's quoted to write the following. Those who make...
Ashkenaz or Sephardi? What is it?
Maram Baruch. Chaim Paltiel, I honestly don't know. So he writes the following. It makes no difference. Those who make a vow to visit the cemeteries, back then people, especially women, they used to say, I'm making a neder, I'm getting stuck, making a neder to visit the kever of this relative. So he says like this, those who make a vow to visit the cemetery, it seems like they are transgressing the Isser of Deir Shel HaMesim. There's a prohibition of Torah against necromancy, talking to the dead. So he says those who visit graves, it seems that they're transgressing this prohibition in the Torah, one of the 613 commands, 365 negative commands. Al Tidr Shel HaMesim. Al Tidr Shel HaMesim. And then he says, but what about all the biblical and Talmudic precedents, right? All these lists of Poskim and scripture, verses in scripture that we find. So he says, the allowance of Kali was because it was a holy place of the Avis, and he wanted his prayers to be heard. So since this was a holy, another says like the whole idea of grave visiting is not to have a conversation with the dead person. It's simply because where a tzaddik is buried, it's a makom kaddish. It's like a makom mikdash. So your prayers are more accepted above. When you're going to go to someone else who's not a tzaddik, who knows where that person's at the moment? Maybe you're going to have to go through more gates to get your prayers passed now. So what are you doing? This is what he writes. Likewise, we find the source visiting the grave to ask for forgiveness. It's also brought down, and this is brought down in the Talmud, so nobody can argue on this, that if somebody offended someone else and the person is no longer amongst the living, then they have to go to their grave so they can ask for forgiveness. That is recorded in the Gemara. So he says, in such a case, it's mutter, as that's where we have Talmudic directive. However, those women and people who don't know this, I do not know why they visit. In other words, those who aren't going because they're a tzaddik and aren't going to ask forgiveness, I do not know why they visit, and I am accustomed to abstain them from doing so, meaning to tell them not to do so. So this was the starter-upper of the anti-grave visitation movement. His name was Chaim Paltiel, Shuvas Miramba.
For regular people.
For non-tzaddikim.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even for tzaddikim, it's understood from his statement, he doesn't agree with people going to the graves and talking to the tzaddik. He says, you go there to daven to God because it's a holy place. But not to have a conversation. Right? So how did the poskim deal with this opinion? They completely negated it. The Shach, in the name of the Bach, writes the following: the Jewish people have already held on to this custom. There's no prohibition involved.
Even for regular people.
Even for regular people.
Okay.
And it's a minhag Yisrael, and therefore there's no issue.
Even to go talk to the person.
He writes that Bach writes the following: Jewish people have already held on to this custom. There is no one who protests and has a source and desire to daven by the grave of one's forefathers to be saved from punishment and their merit. There's already a Seder Tefillah printed for those who visit the graves of their forefathers, and no Rav should make people abstain and nullify this custom. That is the wording of the Bach. So he was part of the pro-grave visitation movement. So we have here a split, and clearly the Bach has won this debate. That is the minhag of all Klal Yisrael. But just be aware, if you ever hear someone singing to the tune of "What are you doing?" visiting graves, he didn't fall off the moon. There is a prior discussion about this of graves, as I said. The Dardrin, that's what they hold till this very day, although, as I already said, the Dardrin have been put in Chayrim. There's very few left of them, if any at all. They're always looking for minyan, and maybe they just give up already. But their Chayrim remains till this very day, not because they don't visit graves, you don't put someone in Chayrim for that, but because they don't believe in the Kedusha of the Zohar and the Kabbalah.
And the people that married with them or not?
Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, one time he was by a Siddur Kedushin together with Yosef Kapach, and he basically didn't want to offend Rabbi Yosef Kapach, but he arranged that another chuppah would be done. Of course. So they were kosherly married, but not with Rabbi Yosef Kapach. He was a big Talmud Chacham, Yosef Kapach, but nonetheless, in any event, these things they had. Okay. So now let's go through different purposes of grave visitation, or the reasons, right? And now we said that, okay, it's mutter, it has precedent, okay. Why? Why do we visit? What are we trying to accomplish? So there's a few different types of purposes of grave visitation, and they split into four. Number one is to elevate the soul of the deceased. One of the purposes of grave visitation is to daven there, say Tehillim there, or even the Mishnayos there, to affect an elevation of the person's soul to heaven. Lighting a candle, yeah. Different things we do. One of the purposes of the visitation is to elevate the soul of the person that's there. The Sefer Chassidim in 450 writes the following: the deceased receives benefit when their loved ones visit their graves and request that their souls be given benefit, and indeed up on high they do give the soul benefit as a result. So the neshamas of the people who are buried in the cemetery actually receive benefit when we do things on their behalf. So that's why visiting the Kever Avis is a very important thing. That's where we can understand why there's a little bit of beef created when a son or a daughter hasn't visited their father's or mother's grave in 7 years. As if 7 years have passed and the father hasn't received this benefit, this elevation, again, we said they're alive. They're just in a concealed mode, but they're alive, so they get offended. What is this? My son, I brought him up. 7 years, doesn't show his face. I'm sitting here in the same level of Gan Eden, eating the same menu every single day. He can come, say a little bit of a shnayis, and will propel me to a higher level.
But he can send me shnayis in Spas.
It's not the same.
In Harazatim.
We just read from Sefer Chassidim. The benefit is specifically when you visit the graves. Although, of course, anytime a son does good deeds...
It's about beyond time and space.
Although, of course, every time a son does good deeds, it benefits the father who brought them into this world. Nonetheless, there's a certain type and quality of benefit that's only accomplished when you are right next to them. When you're by the grave, which is where their nefesh is around. Their nefesh is there.
Why 7 years, by the way? Why not 3 years?
So that's the minhag. We're going to discuss it later on. It's later on in the book. It's the minhag is 7 years. Why 7 years? You can ask the opposite. You can ask maybe it should depend on the father. Some fathers get angrier earlier than others. Some have 10 years worth of patience. Others have 5 years. No, 7 years is what is said.
But if I'm still
also daughters
mourning for my father passed away 3 months
that's
ago.
something else. Within the first year, we don't bother.
Okay.
That's like imagine your father's in the middle of learning a daf gemara or middle of doing the bills for the month, and you come knocking, Dad. Go away. Come back when I'm done. So during the year, we don't give him a little bit of peace, right? The Shama needs peace. Only the set times it's written during the first year. But after that, there's no restrictions. I mean, we're not saying to make a habit of visiting every single day. Don't right? Nobody should become crazy over it. But to visit once in a while. The second reason. So the deceased intervenes on one's behalf. So the second reason is for my benefit, the benefit of the living, is that since he's a soul and he's up in heaven somewhere, so he's a little closer to the source of blessing than I am down here. So when we ask, and plus we get more people to daven for us when we do that. So another reason for visiting graves in order to inform the soul of any issues that one may be facing and have them pray on one's behalf. The Zohar states as follows. This is from the Zohar in Parshas Achrei Bais and Truma. When one visits a grave to beseech him about a certain problem, the nefesh of the deceased goes and awakens the ruach of the deceased, which then goes and awakens the neshama of the deceased, and affects that Hashem have mercy on the world. This is both with the kever of a tzaddik, of course, that a tzaddik who you're connected with has pain when his chassid, when his follower comes and is having an issue. As we said, as the Zohar says, it's a process here, and therefore the neshama, which is in Gan Eden Elyon, davens to Hashem in order to bring mercy onto this individual. So it's for his benefit. But even with non-tzaddikim, even if it's just a person's own father, so if it says that the parents are aware of what's happening to their child when they come and tell them, and they're hurt by it, and they come and they daven to Hashem.
Which day of the week is the best day?
Coming up.
Huh?
We went through 12 halachas. So coming up.
Coming up?
Coming up.
So this is the main. This last one is the main reason why people typically go. This is like the sort of the standard.
You're saying we're kind of selfish, kind of self-centered. We're not really too much thinking about the soul's benefit. We have our own issues.
Like the Lag Bomer, the visit on Lag Bomer, everybody's begging. Okay.
For tzaddikim, yes. For tzaddikim, yes. But the kever of Avis, it should also be to elevate their soul. Sure.
Mothers.
Yeah. Tshuva. Another reason for visiting a grave is in order. Back one step. The sources for this idea of that we go there so they intervene on our behalf. That's brought in the Gemara in Tainus, that it says that when there's no rain, you should go visit Kvarim and have them daven for us. So that's a source. It's a Talmudic source for that. One of the purposes of a grave visiting is for them to intervene on our behalf. And that has a lot of the place can we bring that. Okay, the third is for tshuva. Another reason for visiting graves in order to arouse oneself in tshuva. As while one is by a grave, he remembers the day of death and how his evil ways will lead to the same outcome as those buried there. It's kind of a spooky thought when you visit graves. We got to be realistic. I mean, unless Mashiach comes and we have immediate Tchias HaMesim, everybody's going to be joining. Everybody's going to become a neighbor in that place. And therefore, it's a place that reminds us of the day of death and helps a person do tshuva. This is recorded in Mechaber chapter 579 regarding kindness. And we also know that we visit graves for this reason on Erev Yom. Well, some will visit graves for this reason on Erev Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av to arouse us in tshuva.
Erev Rosh Chodesh.
That's, you're saying that's for tshuva also, to arouse us in tshuva? That's more for tzaddikim, to intercede on our behalf. That's more kivrei tzaddikim. It's not stop klar Erev Rosh Chodesh.
Right.
And here we're talking about for tshuva, it's any grave sign. Any grave sign. Okay, the last one is what we touched upon earlier, to request forgiveness from the deceased. One of the reasons why we visit grave sites is to ask for mechila. If we've sinned against the deceased, one is to visit the grave and request forgiveness from by saying, I have sinned against the God of Israel. This is the nusach you're supposed to say. I have sinned against the God of Israel and this individual who I sinned against. And the following is the order that's practiced when one visits a grave to ask for mechila. If the grave is within a 3 parsha distance, then one is required to go barefoot to the grave together with 10 people and ask for mechila. So no shoes. Maybe you can get away with socks, but no shoes. And you have to go with a group of it with a minyan. However, if the grave of the person is further away than 3 parsahs, so let's say if somebody offended someone here in the Tzfas cemetery, and they live in Tzfas, so they have to go barefoot with 10 people. You don't have to worry here in Tzfas, you won't look too out of the ordinary by doing so. But in other places you may.
And dangerous rocks, things to walk on. Get out of your car with.
So the best thing is don't offend people. Don't offend dead people. Don't start up with the dead. Right?
Well, this is asking forgiveness for when they were alive, no?
Sure. If they didn't get a chance when they were alive to ask for mechila, that's what the best thing is. If somebody has passed away, and you know that there was some issue that you need to ask them mechila for, and you never had the guts or the courage to do so, or the care to do so while they were alive, and try to make it to the levaya and ask them during the levaya, because there you have 10 people around, and the neshama is present, and you ask them for forgiveness. But if you miss, then you have to follow this order. Now, if it's more than 3 parsahs away, then you have to send a shliach with 10 people to ask for forgiveness from the deceased. That is the order that is followed. And we know of many, many stories of people after Gimel Tammuz who have regretted their ways of speaking against the tzaddik, the Rebbe, and they've done this. They send a shliach with 10 people to ask mechila. They must have to do it like a set daily thing. And Baruch Hashem, a lot of people coming back, and people recognizing mistakes, and they come and they ask mechila in front of 10 people from the tzaddik. Okay, we're going to go through today.
Which day will continue?
Tuesday night.
Is there a way to